Welcome to Crunching Tackles, where we break down the hardest hitting social issues in sports. On today's show, we catch up on some of the most important sports headlines we've missed since the World Cup. My name is Chad Wiley, and with me, as always, is John Nekrasov. And John, my opening question to you is this. Have you watched a live sporting event since the World Cup final of any capacity?
That's such an interesting question. And now that I'm thinking about it, I think the answer is no, not a single one, which is bizarre because up until the World Cup and during the World Cup, sports was all around us. It was the central fiber of society, it felt like. And now we're just in a complete dead zone, which is a good chance for us to reflect. But it is also strange. Have you watched anything? I guess you probably have, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've watched some Formula One. I've watched some baseball.
Right.
I've gotten a little bit more into baseball. But I think I watched like one MLS game. So, I mean, I'm definitely I'm still attuned to things, but I wouldn't say that there's like a particular sport that has really caught the fire of the moment right now.
No. And I think it'll be interesting. Again, it gives us a good breathing opportunity. I will say that I've been deeply involved in the Arsenal transfer market. Rumors over the last couple weeks since the World Cup ended, but that's been my only sports involvement, which is a strange time for me, but it's given me an opportunity to do some reading, watch some cinema. I think both of us have watched The Odyssey multiple times.
Indeed.
And I've watched things at home. I've just been able to chill out, and Katie and I have gone around and done things out of the house that didn't involve watching the World Cup, and that's all things
absolutely.
Balance. Things have been a good time.
I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping here at the top, John, and just kind of say that we are a podcast that accepts feedback from the audience.
Yeah, we do.
And one piece of feedback that we have been aware of, but we have lacked the discipline to implement, is getting our podcast back under the hour mark. Because we know that there are some people where any podcast longer than an hour is just a barrier to their enjoyment / ability to listen or watch. And so what we're going to be doing is we're not going to be talking less. We're just going to be splitting our long episodes in half, basically. And so our goal is that we're going to be posting podcasts more frequently, like twice every 2 weeks, and shorter in the 35 to 40 minute range, and just do two of those instead of one. So for example, on this show, we're going to do a roundup, and then what would be our big story on the back half of this podcast is actually going to be another podcast that will post 3 or 4 days after this one. Does that make sense?
I think it does make sense. And I think it'll hopefully align better with everyone's listening schedules, because I understand I also skip podcasts that are over an hour and a half, and all too frequently we hit that number.
Yeah. So I hope that people enjoy this new format, and I want this to also be evidence that we do hear you and we are receptive to your feedback. So please continue to engage with us, because if enough of you say your podcasts are too long, we will do something about it. So without further ado, John, in the spirit of that, let's go ahead and jump in.
I'm so excited. We have a lot to talk through today. And I do, just at the top here, we're going to talk about non-soccer stuff, but I do think we're also going to take some time in this specific episode to do a look back at kind of the beginnings of the legacy of this World Cup. Obviously, soccer and FIFA have been in the news a lot. We'll get to that next episode, so stay tuned for that. We'll plug that again at the bottom of this show. But we will talk about just kind of our I guess 2 weeks later, our retrospective on the World Cup and how things went, what went well and poorly, and what we think the legacy of this World Cup will continue to be. But first, we have some other things that we've just kind of skated past over the summer.
Yeah, this is our Things We Missed episode. And I want to acknowledge at the top that the most important thing that has happened in the world of sports since the beginning of the World Cup is West Virginia versus BPJ, the Supreme Court decision about transgender athletes. We are not going to be talking about on this episode. We might and probably will devote a full episode to that decision sometime in the near future. But I just wanted to acknowledge that we're aware of that that's going to require, I think, more time than we could give it today. And so we're going to let that sit for a little bit longer and do some lighter stuff. But I do think that's an important thing to just mention that was a huge decision that happened. So if you want to do some homework for a future podcast, you can go read the Supreme Court opinion on that. John, I think the biggest cultural news in America right now is about LeBron James, because LeBron James is one of the most famous people in America and in the world. And in a move that really did surprise me, I genuinely surprised me, he chose to sign a very, very friendly, team friendly 2-year, $8 million deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. Bringing LeBron back to the East Coast, where he has played the majority of his NBA basketball, bringing him to a much disgruntled fan base who have been desperate for success for a long time, who have been plagued with an extremely talented yet constantly injury-ridden superstar, Joel Embiid, who have just secured the blockbuster trade of this offseason as well, getting Jaylen Brown from the Boston Celtics, and now they add LeBron James. What do you make of this decision by LeBron?
I think it's interesting because LeBron moving here to me is his play at doing a Tampa Tom. Tom Brady famously moved to Tampa in a kind of similar situation after, winning so many rings with the Patriots, decided to give it one more go, decided to go to a team that was ready to at least start putting the pieces together to win immediately. And win immediately he did. I think unlike Brady, LeBron is looking to really kind of rubber stamp his GOAT status, which, I feel like probably a majority of NBA fans are still on Team Jordan. But there's a sizable contingent of people who are Team LeBron. And I think LeBron, in doing this, is trying to really stake his claim that if 41-year-old LeBron James can win a championship with the Philadelphia 76ers, that conversation that has kind of felt like it's died down is really reignited on a whole new level. I think the 76ers are interesting because I think it makes sense that he left the Lakers. Like, that iteration of the Lakers to me is all about how good Luka Doncic is going to be, and that team needs to build around him. And I think trying to build a team around LeBron and Luka was never going to deliver another championship. Obviously, LeBron got that one during COVID, but other than that, they were never going to go back to that point. I think the issue with the 76ers, to me, I understand the mindset, but at the same time, you look at the roster they built. Jaylen Brown is obviously very good. LeBron is a talented player, obviously, even at this age, but has his limitations. And Joel Embiid certainly has his limitations, especially just given his fitness. I look at that team. I don't know what you think as a more seasoned NBA analyst than me, but it seems kind of like a desperation play by the 76ers office to me, just on its face, more than oh yeah, we are really building for the future of this organization and really building the best possible roster that we can. Maybe that's true, but I don't know that the best possible roster they can build with LeBron James is a championship winning team.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the 76ers, it's an acknowledgement that the best possible roster they'll have in a long time is this year, right? Joel Embiid is not getting any younger. They have just acquired Jaylen Brown, who, for my money, was the best player on the Celtics. Some would say Tatum. I would say Brown. Tyrese Maxey is a rising star at the point guard position. And they add, a veteran player in LeBron who is still, I think, he's above a league average player in the NBA. He is an above average starter. Is he a top 10 player in the NBA right now? No. Is he a top 20 NBA player in the world right now? Probably not. But he's, an above average NBA starting player. And, I think it's impossible to talk about this from a 76ers perspective just because there are so many uncertainties. Obviously, team chemistry, Embiid's health is a huge factor. But I think for LeBron, it's such an interesting decision for him. I was shocked by how little money he was taking. right? Like you would think that there would be a team who would have paid him somewhere in the 12 to 17 million dollars a year range. Not like the 40 he was making in the past, but a lot more money than he's making. Making $4 million a year is a sign that he really is there to win a championship. Like that's what he's about.
Yes.
He wants it to be a team friendly deal and he doesn't care about the money. He wants to be there for 2 years with the sole purpose of winning a championship. LeBron James has won a championship with every franchise he's played for. So yeah, I think that there were certain teams that he just probably couldn't go to because they were almost too good. Like I don't think I don't think the Spurs or OKC or the Knicks, I don't think those were options really because not only had they had so much recent success, but also like he might actually LeBron might actually derail like the young culture that the Spurs are building, for example, or like the Knicks already have championship chemistry. They don't. So do OKC. They don't need to add LeBron. But I think LeBron did a smart job of picking a team that is constantly close but never quite there. And maybe they are, one LeBron James away from one magic run in one of the next 2 years. Like it would not shock me if the 76ers did win a championship. I think they're a top 3 team in the East. Like I really do. I think it's probably the Knicks and then Miami, the revamped Miami with Giannis, and then it's the 76ers. And then, the Cavs and the Celtics are there too. But and the Pistons. But I think they'll be contending for a top 3 seed in the conference, and I think that they could make a run. I don't know. I think it's interesting.
It is interesting. I feel like it's one of those like FIFA, like late game FIFA transfer windows where all of a sudden like every player is at the complete wrong club from where they should be. And that's what the NBA feels to me right now.
Yeah.
Like Giannis does not feel like he should be on the Heat to me. LeBron does not feel like he should be in Philadelphia to me. Everything's confused. Everything's weird. But I do think it'll be entertaining. And for that reason, I'm very on board. I will be watching, especially if they make the playoffs. I'm not an avid regular season watcher of the NBA, but now that it's on Prime and LeBron will be, playing at a new team, I definitely will be tuning in from time to time because I'm just curious. I'm curious how it's going to go. I think my prediction is Embiid will not be healthy almost at all this year, and this experiment will not work. But I think it won't be LeBron's fault.
Yeah,
that's my prediction.
Betting on Embiid to be injured is pretty good money these days. John, we want to, before we talk about Wimbledon, do we need to acknowledge that since the World Cup, Alexander Zverev became a Grand Slam champion? Is that even a real thing that happened?
No.
Okay, then we won't even acknowledge it. We're moving right on.
Happen.
Okay, great.
I think we did acknowledge it as a falsehood and are going to continue to acknowledge it as a falsehood because what really happened was Alexander Zverev lost when he faced a real player in the Wimbledon final.
Arguably the first real player he played in 2 consecutive Grand Slams.
Yeah, and that's what matters is Jannik Sinner, who just had a complete heat collapse in the French Open, went up against Alexander Zverev in the final of Wimbledon. This was, Sinner returning to the final after winning Wimbledon last year. Sinner lost the first set, and you and I were very concerned. And then he righted things. Zverev predictably faded away. And even though this new and improved Zverev is definitely a better player than he's been in the past, he still did not have what it took to take down Sinner, who, when we look at where Jannik Sinner has been since he won Wimbledon last year, this is probably the worst since Sinner's kind of star first rose. This has probably been Sinner's worst year since we've been covering him kind of aggressively. Like he got smoked by Carlos in the US Open final. He lost, I think, to Djokovic in Australia. He lost to Cerundolo in the French Open, in really difficult circumstances. But now he's back. And I think that matters a lot. He's now down 5-7 to Carlos in slams. And I think if Carlos has missed 2 tournaments now, slams, I think if we went that stretch and Sinner came away with no titles, we really start to be like, okay, is is there like an inferiority complex starting to kind of like step in here that he's not able to actually capitalize when his major rival is gone. So I think this is important for him. I still think that he's not going to pass Carlos in terms of slams in his career unless this longevity issue with Carlos and injuries becomes a more repeated theme, in which case who knows what's going to happen. But I think that's my analysis. I know you watched this match, I believe.
Yeah.
What were your takeaways from Wimbledon?
Well, I mean, Carlos obviously has an injury problem. He's missed 2 straight slams. Sinner still has a 5-set long match problem that came up again in the French Open, where like the longer a match goes, especially if it goes to 5 sets, Sinner does not win those. He just doesn't. But he did take care of Alexander Zverev in 4 sets. After and he did beat Djokovic in the semifinal, which was very impressive. Djokovic had another just, again, at his age, another semifinal is just a massive result for him. I think that we, a year ago, we were kind of expecting just 4 more Sinner Alcaraz finals, and none of them have really gone that way. And I think that's mostly due to Carlos and his injury. And again, we're hoping that he's better and back for the U.S. Open. I agree with you that Sinner is kind of seems vulnerable at this point. I also think that he has not capitalized to the extent that he could have. It is frankly an embarrassment, the path that Zverev had in the French Open. Like the lack of any opposition he faced was frankly just embarrassing and completely discredits the authenticity of that Grand Slam victory.
Which Grand Slam victory?
Yeah, and I'm not familiar with any, so
I don't know what you're talking about.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. But I mean, I do think that the rivalry is shaky, right? The Sinner Alcaraz rivalry is shaky right now, and I think that they both need to make a run at the U.S. Open to kind of bring the magic back to the men's side of tennis, because none of the people we've been waiting for have made that jump. Like I'm still waiting on Felix Auger-Aliassime and Ben Shelton and other people to do it. And like Zverev inspires no confidence or joy in anyone, it seems like. And so I think that the ATP Tour and the men's Grand Slam is a little bit like a ship without a rudder right now. And they need these 2 guys to get back into form and steer this ship back into an exciting and enjoyable place again. And hopefully they will do that next month in New York.
Yeah, I do think this U.S. Open matters a lot. When we look at last year, I think I'm struggling to remember who won in Australia, but in Wimbledon, in Roland Garros, and in the U.S. Open, Sinner and Carlos faced off in all 3 Slam finals, which was huge, right? That year was very much defined by their rivalry in a way that this year just has not been. I think that has to be our expectation, that like what we were getting last year was unique and special, and I think we'll continue to have that over their careers, but I don't think it'll be perfect. It's not going to be them in every final, which I think will make it more special. I think it matters that, every final is not them, just because I don't want it to be boring, because at its best, that rivalry is like some of the best box office tennis that you can get and the best sports you can get in anything. But yeah, ultimately, I think I still feel as this year goes on, it's Carlos, it's Sinner, and Novak is still hanging around even though he's old, and then it's Zverev as the best of the rest. And beyond that, I mean, who is there? That's the real question. Like, no one is challenging.
Yeah, I mean, that's the idea that saying that more parity would be less boring. I don't really believe that until I can watch another person and actually believe that they can do it.
Right.
Like, that's the problem.
Yeah, I mean, Zverev coasted through, right? And
Right.
That just kind of proves where everyone else is at. You have some players who can show talent. Like I like watching Flavio Caballi play.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's got a nice forehand. He plays well. Players like that are in the mix and can beat players on their day, but no one is consistently great outside of those 4. And unfortunately, Zverev is more consistent than the rest of everyone else for our agenda, and that's just the way it is. But Sinner and Carlos are kind of carrying the burden of tennis being interesting right now, at least on the men's side.
Alcaraz just pulled out of the Cincinnati Open like 2 seconds ago. So
Ooh.
that puts some doubt into his US Open prospects.
That would be bad.
So that would be really bad. Very briefly, I would just like to say that if Alexander Zverev played in a American domestic sports league that had some sort of like better legal structure and had the same allegations that he has against him, he probably would not be playing a sport. And he shouldn't be playing sports. And I stand by that opinion.
I would agree if I trusted the American domestic sports leagues, because that has not been the case in most American sports leagues, but that's by the by.
Yeah. Very briefly, John, I want to talk about Formula One. We are at the halfway point in the Formula One season right now. And the number 2 driver in Formula One is 41-year-old Lewis Hamilton, who, while the World Cup was going on, won his first ever Grand Prix for Ferrari in Barcelona, his first win for Ferrari. He is second in the driver standings. He has 5 podiums this season, and it has just been a wonderful resurgent season. He really, really struggled last year. We talked a little bit about it. Like this is highly, highly anticipated move to Ferrari. It is the dream of every driver to stand on top of the podium wearing the Ferrari red. And I just want to say, like, Kimi Antonelli is probably going to run away with the Drivers' Championship this season. And that's super exciting for him. And he's like a kid. And so it's really cool that he's going to be like the next major sensation. But on the other side of the age spectrum, what Hamilton is doing is really cool and impressive. And I hope people enjoy this while he's still going, because he has really put Ferrari in a position where they are looking good in second place, and he is looking very, very good in second place. He's closer to Kimi Antonelli in second place than Max Verstappen is to him in 7th place.
That's crazy. I didn't know that Lewis Hamilton was that old. So that's news to me.
Yeah.
That is crazy. I don't have a lot to add on Formula One, obviously, but I would like to add that we, when I was in Raleigh visiting you a couple weeks ago, we tried a Formula One racing simulator, which was my first time doing that. I think I gained a respect for Formula One drivers and also lost some respect for my own driving during that experience.
It was all so I have to say hard.
Yeah.
It was
one of the most difficult things I've done.
Yeah. It was fun though. We had a great time.
We did. But the amount of times I spun out, the most difficult thing for me beyond just keeping the car on the track during the turns was trying to be on the track at the same time as all the other race car drivers who were more in control of their cars than me. Just like the AI computer race car drivers that just all ran me off the road. Genuinely, every time they would lap me, they would just all like knock me in a circle, and I'd be like, the amount of safety cars that would be on the track just due to my driving is astonishing. So
yeah, absolutely. John, so those are 3 things we missed during the World Cup: LeBron, Wimbledon, and Lewis Hamilton's win. We should briefly just do a final postmortem on the World Cup with some final more cultural takeaways. I know the last podcast we talked a lot about the game and also, but not just the final, but some of like our favorite moments from the World Cup. But I think that we're going to look back on what you term like the legacy of this World Cup, which is already kind of coming into the picture, and a lot of those cultural elements when it comes to like the growth of soccer in the sport, which is something we've talked about, or just like the kind of just the joys of the international community coming together, which is something that we documented during this World Cup, but also kind of just the state of soccer as we're starting to see some international managers change teams, or we see some contracts come through. What are you kind of thinking about as you are reflecting on the World Cup?
Yeah, and I think, again, plugging our next episode, we're going to talk about the way that FIFA has tried to kind of leverage this World Cup into a much bigger story that I think in some ways is going to be the legacy of this World Cup, is the saga that has come out of the World Cup. And we'll get to that in more detail. But setting aside basically the last week, the actual tournament itself, as it always does, I think went really smoothly, ultimately, with the exception of the Balogun incident and, some, minor things here and there with VAR. Obviously the refereeing, it's true of every soccer tournament, but I feel like it's never been more true than this World Cup that refereeing was the centerpiece in many games of this tournament. And I think FIFA needs to look very seriously at the way they officiated this tournament across the board because I thought it was very bad. Um, but I think ultimately, like the legacy of this World Cup, setting aside kind of those like sideshow negative things that happened, is overwhelmingly positive. I think that like the experience of overseas fans coming to the States, coming to Canada and Mexico seems pretty much universally awesome. Like, we saw so many social media clips and also just, so many people met people from all over the world just having the times of their lives, experiencing everything from, you know, rafting down rivers to Texas barbecue to everything in between. Like, you and I have both grown up in America, and it's easy for both people inside and outside America, I think, to critique all kinds of things. But I think that's true of every country, and America has so much to offer in so many unique ways. And I loved that people got to experience that. Like, I thought that was awesome. And I think Americans kind of, in conjunction with that, had an incredible time hosting this tournament. I think that soccer genuinely has never been bigger in the United States than it is right now. And that's like 100% due to the World Cup. Like, the momentum will be, there are many sports and cultural things to deal with in America that means that soccer is not going to always be the number one thing like it is in some countries. And that's something it's going to have to reckon with constantly. However, I do think that soccer is now part of the culture in a way that it has never been here in the States. And I think that's awesome. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Ultimately, super on board.
Yeah, I agree with you on all those points. I would add, like, it was the largest World Cup ever in terms of format. So more teams than ever. And I think overall that was a positive. I think every country, for the most part, put in a good showing of themselves, even down to like the 48th team. Um, it was obviously, we've talked about how it was like the most viewed soccer telecast and one of the most viewed non NFL playoff sports telecasts in America, which is massive.
Yeah.
For all of our worries about ticket prices, which were outrageous, and we can't forget that, there was still over a 99% stadium occupancy rate for this World Cup. So the stadiums were packed, people were glued to the televisions consistently. It really did have, I think, a good culture. It had a very large cultural blueprint or footprint, the World Cup did. And I think when you specifically look at it from an American perspective, America both put in a good showing for itself and I think gained a new appreciation for the sport that I hope carries on in the next years. Some of the things that we talked about in the lead up to the World Cup, like, worried about things like ice, being at stadiums, at least in terms of like things that were very public. I didn't see a lot of that. A lot of the things that could have gone wrong, for the most part, didn't go wrong until Donald Trump decided to be up the trophy lift. But that was going to happen regardless. But I really do think, like, for the most part, the worst case scenarios that we were talking about in the build up to the World Cup didn't happen, and the actual World Cup, both as a sporting tournament where the majority of the games were very, very good, and also as a cultural experience, I thought they get high marks on both of those, genuinely.
Yeah, I mean, it worked.
Mm-hmm.
It was a pageant of international relations of countries coming together and just having a great time. And it was an incredible soccer tournament. I think those are the two things you always have to measure a World Cup by, is like, is the tournament experience memorable and is the soccer memorable? And we got a lot of memorable soccer. I think when you look at the deep rounds of the tournament, that always kind of fades away because things get cagey. Like, it's rare that you have an iconic World Cup final or an iconic semifinal just because it's so much is on the line that no one wants to make a mistake. And that was true of this tournament, but we still had some incredible games, incredible individual performances. And I think that maybe we can talk a little bit about Spain. I think that when we look at the way Spain won this World Cup and the way that they are continuing to just kind of assert their authority over international soccer over the last, 15, 20 years, it is a blueprint for how to organize a country right to win international soccer. And I think America needs to take a lot of lessons from that if they want to be serious. Spain has less resources than the US, right, in general to spend on sports. But Spain is finely calibrated and has a rich coaching history to put together to train players literally from birth, essentially, as we see with Lamine Yamal and all those photos. Like Spain builds players who understand how to positionally play with the soccer ball, and that is not something that every country does. And I think that like the World Cup is fascinating because it is a test of, more than anything, how well you train your players to play together. Brazil produces some phenomenal players all over the world, but there is a lack of talent in specific positions, and there's a lack of an ability to play together as a cohesive unit. You've seen that with Germany over the last few cycles. You see it with England constantly on the biggest stage. But Spain has this ability to create players who are just intelligent with the ball. And that ultimately matters more than anything else in this game. I really do believe that. So I don't know. It was interesting. I think it's going to be, this tournament could have so easily been the French tournament, and it was ready to be the French tournament. And then it ended up not being. And I think that, like, I don't know, how do you feel? Like, I feel like France's kind of opening dominance of this tournament is going to genuinely like fade into obscurity, which is not how I expected things to go. But I think it just goes to show how much winning a World Cup when you're putting on performances like that really matters.
Yeah, I really don't think now is the time to be doing a post-mortem on France, because their players are all still in the beginnings of their physical primes and will be essentially the same core for the next two World Cups with one of the most accomplished tournament managers in the history of global soccer in Zinedine Zidane. So like France were in a semifinal in which they were embarrassed, but Spain embarrassed a lot of teams. And
right.
I don't think that the France story of this, I don't think this generation's France story is in any way over. They could easily.
Oh no, I don't mean. Yeah, to be clear, I don't mean this generation. I mean like this World Cup iteration. I think the 2022 France will end up being remembered a lot more than this one. What would you say to that?
Losing in the finals on penalties is obviously more dramatic than losing in the semifinal in which you didn't like score. Yes, of course, but like, are they like lots of good teams didn't win the World Cup this year, and so like I don't think that like. I think that they were the favorites and they lost. That happens at a lot of tournaments. I don't think it's like a crisis for them. I do think that like they may not be remembered in the same way. Certainly, like I think if you think about this World Cup, you're going to think about Spain as the winners. You're going to think about Argentina and particularly how they played in the final and how embarrassing that was. And then you'll think about some of the fun stories like Cape Verde. You'll think about Norway, things like that.
Right.
All that said, though, Kylian Mbappe still walks out of this World Cup as the all-time World Cup goal scorer, and he probably is going to play in three more of these. Like, it was a big deal, right, early on in the tournament when Messi broke the record to win this World Cup, and people were like, oh, man, Messi might have, a little bit, maybe even one World Cup where he is the all-time World Cup goal scorer. And no, because Mbappe took it from him in the same World Cup. He's played in half the amounts of World Cups as Messi. He has scored more goals, and he probably will play in three more and will just obliterate this record into an impossibility to ever be topped, unless Norway go to 6 straight World Cups and Holland goes crazy. But I think Mbappe had a very successful tournament. individually, even though the team did not. And I think the French team with new management are going to continue. I continue to be most interested in this generation of France more than any other team, I think, for the next two more World Cups.
Yeah,
But
I think.
I want to talk about your point about Spain, though, real quick, unless you have more thoughts about France. On Spain, I think that you pointed out something that's so important, which is like the way that Spain plays together. And I think that's so interesting from an American perspective because in America, we see sports where like the Olympic team, the US Olympic team can roll up to an Olympics and they've never played together and then they just cruise
Right.
to an Olympics. And there's a reason why like in basketball, they're not playing months and months of friendlies tournaments like leading up to they don't play friendlies. They can just roll up to a World Cup and just figure it out, or to an Olympics and just figure it out. And soccer is not that way at all. And that's why consistency of the team and consistency at the manager position matters so much in World Cup soccer. Brazil doesn't have that. They're changing managers all the time. Spain does have that. And that's why I'm so glad that the USA have signed Pochettino to a new contract, because that means that he will be the manager for 6 years and two World Cups. And that's the type of momentum building decision you need to make if you actually want to grow, because you need consistency at the top, at the leadership. And that has been the Spanish blueprint on the men's and at the women's level. And I think other countries are starting to take note of that. And the USA certainly have, I think.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point. I think that looking at the US, 2030 is going to be actually a much better barometer for the long-term future of the United States. Hosting a World Cup is always a really big deal, and there's a lot of pressure and also a lot of impetus behind a host nation to perform well. 2030 will not be that way. They'll be abroad. It'll be Pochettino's team, that he has recruited for, like you said, a good amount of time. And I think that we saw a team that started to play the Pochettino way during this tournament and then came up against superior opposition and then just completely fell apart due to individual errors. My hope is that, in 4 years, there will be at least the beginnings of another kind of wave of young players that will start to fill in the gaps of this team who, maybe we're not quite at the level in some positions that they needed to be at. We even looking at some of the stars like Pulisic, obviously we discussed many times, who just wasn't at the level he needed to be at. My hope is that, these players will continue to find consistency at the club level, and that, we're already seeing waves and waves of young players for the US going abroad and playing for at least, mid-level teams in Europe and playing consistently. Sebastian Berhalter moved to the Championship to play for Middlesbrough. It's not playing in the Premier League.
Florian Balogun is being somewhat looked at by PSG.
That would be crazy.
Yeah, I mean that might not happen, but he's at least being looked at.
Yeah, and I think that that shows that there are players increasingly who have a ton of talent and are going to continue to come through the ranks, and Pochettino's going to love that. I would love to see the US make a go a step further at this next tournament. I think it really matters for the success of this program to continue building on the success they had in this tournament. And I think that in the opportunities that players have in between now and 2030 to play for the US in regional competitions, the players have to show up. It has to be a priority. We can't have players like Pulisic just being like, no, I'm not showing up. This is not a priority for me right now. I want to see this USA team dominate every tournament they show up in under Pochettino. I think they can, and I think they will have the quality to, but I think we need a new fire lit under them by this coach. And I'm really glad he's staying. I don't know, maybe he won't stay all the way to 2030, but if he does, I think it can be only good for the US.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is that this World Cup has also shown a very good Canada team and a very, very good Mexico team. And like these Gold Cups and these Nations Leagues between now and the next World Cup are going to be
Yeah,
crucial
it
to
matters.
say, like, are we set apart or not? We have had dominance over Mexico and Canada recently, but both of those teams I thought were very impressive in moments during the World Cup. Mexico in particular have an amazing young generation of players. They're no slouches by any means.
Mm-mm.
And so I'm excited for the potential, right? But it all comes down to whether it happens or not. Like we have to, yes, at some point you have to meet the potential. Um, and I as we kind of look forward to 2030, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I would expect the USA, and whether it's a 48 team World Cup, whether it's a 64 team World Cup, like we don't even know exactly what the format's going to be, but I would expect the USA to be even better with if it, and I hope that Pochettino does stay through his commitment.
Yeah, I think if the U.S. does not go around further, the Pochettino tenure has been a failure.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that really matters, and I think that's why he's staying. I think he believes in this team, and I think that U.S. soccer, you know, believes in him enough to invest in keeping him around because he costs a lot of money, and I think that's awesome. So,
Yeah.
there are people around who are like, he didn't take the team far enough. I don't believe that. I think that he did an incredible job and really kind of really gelled with this team in a way that I don't think we expected before the World Cup. But I think he's a well loved man in America now, and I'm excited to have him stay.
Do you have any other thoughts on the World Cup before we get into our big FIFA deep dive in the next episode?
Um, did you have a favorite game as we
Yeah,
finish up thinking about the World
there
Cup?
are lots of contenders, but when people have asked me, my gut reaction, like my first impression I've always said England, Mexico.
Yeah,
And so that's the one I'm going to stick with.
England Mexico was my favorite too. It was just
Yeah.
like the most insane game. Genuinely, like one of the craziest games I've ever seen in the game of soccer ever.
Yeah, I mean, a
Just
knockout round game
madness.
in an amazing atmosphere, a really good game in which England looked rocked for a moment. Like it was wonderful. It was really, really just the best.
Dan Burn coming on will forever be one of the moments of the World Cup for me. And it was so worth it. It was amazing.
I already missed the World Cup.
I know, man. The Premier League is around the corner. We have
Yeah,
2 weeks.
that's true.
And then things get going.
That is true. And John, one of the biggest questions for the World Cup in 2030 is going to be who is actually in charge of FIFA at the next World Cup. And that question has become a bit more complicated than we thought it was. And that's going to be a big part of the story of our next episode, which is going to come out, like I said, 3-4 days after this one. And you're not going to want to miss it. It's going to be a massive episode about FIFA and words that FIFA don't like being associated with, like corruption and greed, but FIFA keep on FIFAing, John. And so thank you all. I hope you guys enjoy this a little bit shorter format. And please do come back for our big story next week, in the next few days. And we hope that you all continue to be well and be safe. And we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Cheers, guys.